Greetings, recappers. There's that Hall of Fame scene in the OG Jurassic Park in which Jeff Goldblum struts to that one big pile of shit, removes his glasses in that cool guy way, and says, "That is one big pile of shit." Such a pile of shit could not be a more polar opposite from today's conversation with Caldwell Buntin, Ph.D., even though it is as Dinosaur Ridge. Using drone photogrammetry in Colorado's Dinosaur Ridge, Dr. Buntin made a grand discovery that spawned a riveting theory, one that involves dinosaur mating rituals and dance arenas. Yes, you heard right. No, it's not a metaphor. Maybe dinos had mad game. Several prolific news outlets ran this story, but none enjoyed this type of conversation with Caldwell, one that combs deeply through the case study, but then veers into Caldwell himself, drone adventures in Australia, paleontology, geology, oceanography, Mars, reality capture and academia, GIS, AGI, and De-Extinction companies. It's a lot, but he's done a lot, and he knows a lot. So please enjoy the brilliant Dr. Caldwell Buntin. Caldwell Buntin, Ph.D., welcome to the Recap Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Honor is all here, sir. You were recapped for your drone photogrammetry, which led to a dinosaur discovery so newsworthy that ABC News and Smithsonian, if I recall, ran with the story, which is how I learned of your work. We're going to explore in spades the drone use in 3D tech and many other topics. But first, for those who may have missed the story, could you please explain in as much detail as you'd like what you discovered in present-day Colorado?
Yeah. So Dinosaur Ridge, which is right on the Front Range of the Rockies, just west of Denver, is really well known for a really large dinosaur track site. About 300 feet away from that track site, two Courtship scrapes were identified about 10 years ago, basically produced from dinosaurs doing some kind of a dance to try to woo a mate. This discovery extends from just those two scrapes now to around 35 possible scrapes on that surface. So we think that this was some kind of courtship arena rather than just an isolated occurrence of courtship behavior.
You said the initial two were discovered 10 years ago, correct? Was that, I was going to introduce this gentleman later, but was that Dr. Martin Lockley's work?
Yes, it was. So he originally detected the scrapes in 2014, and then he described both of them in a paper in 2016, and then another one in 2018.
And you eventually would come to work alongside him. Under him, he was a professor of yours, or?
I would call him more of a site mentor. So I met him and got involved with him when I first started working at Dinosaur Ridge for my dissertation. And during that first kind of 3 days of orientation for the site, we found an additional scrape that basically led me to be able to identify the rest of the other scrapes after I had worked on it.
And just to establish this decade-long timeline, when are we talking? So you started your dissertation when?
May of 2021 was when I first started doing field work for my dissertation. And then I formally started my PhD in August of 21.
Okay. And all in all, so from 2 courtship scrapes to 35.
Yep.
As it stands today. So I read a fascinating snippet from this, I believe was the ABC News article, that you had said, quote, "We interpret these trace fossils to be evidence of dinosaur courtship activities just from a process of elimination." I'm very curious. What scenarios were eliminated and how?
Yeah, so there was the possibility that these would have been generated from dinosaurs maybe foraging for food. The type of dinosaurs that these were probably omnivores, which makes sense. This was a heavily forested area supported by tree roots pretty much covering the entire surface. So if they were trying to dig for roots, we would expect to see maybe more condensed scrapes than we have. It seems right now that these tend to be fairly spaced out within the clusters that they occur in. So they're not just going after one root or piece of vegetable matter and then moving along and digging to basically eat as much as they can. They're also, whenever we do see them interacting with any of those roots, they tend to be really short, suggesting that they stopped that behavior. The second was that these could possibly have been colonial nesting sites, which typically with those in birds, you see nests of all the same size, and they tend to be distributed fairly evenly throughout the space that's being used for the colony. So again, your nests tend to be really evenly spaced out, which for a lot of these scrapes, most of them aren't the same size. We have ones that are really shallow, ones that are maybe a half meter, the majority being around a meter to maybe 1.25 meters. And then you have some that are up to about 3 meters in length. So a pretty big range in sizes. They also seem to be randomly distributed across not only this surface, but also across the 3 Western Colorado sites where we see a lot of these other traces. So I don't really see any real evidence for the nest building hypothesis. To add on to that, the shape of them is pretty variable as well, with only about 20% of them having a true bowl shape to them that you would expect to see with the nest. And finally, the last kind of maybe use that was
potential
rejected
counterpoint
was that these could, that was rejected was that these could have been used for territorial markings, with which we would expect to see some kind of a urolite, or basically evidence that there was maybe urine to mark the area. And then with mammals, with territorial marking, you tend to see them fairly spaced far apart, up to about 1 mile or 2. So given that these are so close together, and it reflects some kind of active digging behavior, that was kind of shut down as well. With the last real kind of thought of what these were courtship scrapes, which their distribution in my study tends to be fairly similar to what we see with sage grouses in terms of their spatial distribution and patterns of basically occurring in large clusters produced by a single male performing a courtship display.
No kidding. So TLDR, sage grouse's mating rituals are similar to that of these dinosaurs?
They could have been. I'm referring more so to if you take like a top-down shot of a lek or a courtship arena, where those males are distributed within that arena is really similar to how these scrapes are kind of arranged, where you have large spaces between each of the males, and then each bout would basically produce a number of traces. So you would end up with a male surrounded by a number of different either pseudonests or scrapes from basically its activity of trying to woo a female. So if we kind of remove the noise of individual scrapes across all these dinosaur sites, gives you kind of a larger overview of what you would expect if a single male was there. So you can start mapping it out, taking that spatial scale out and just looking at that per context to compare both different types of organisms.
Fascinating. Utterly fascinating. You mentioned the word lek that is the official term for a courtship space, domain, realm.
Yeah. So a lek in itself, or courtship arena, is really anywhere where you have a number of males congregating to perform some kind of courtship display. So it's just the 4-letter or the $4 word for dance arena.
So still used to, it's not just exclusive to dinosaurs or anything Triassic like that. It's still there are leks all around us.
Yeah. So a number of different types of animals perform courtship behaviors and form leks, including some mammals, like I believe it's antelopes, some kind of a hooved animal. I came across it. I didn't really digest the material because I figured it was too far apart from what I was doing. As well as a number of birds, the capercaillie, piping plovers, sage grouses, and also some insects like bees will perform courtship displays.
Fascinating. So back to Dinosaur Ridge in this 10-year saga. When did you know you wanted to leverage drone photogrammetry?
Back in probably early 2022. So when I was doing my field orientation, Nefra Matthews, who was formerly with the USGS, retired, showed me how to do close range photogrammetry. And I kind of really took to it. I really like the possibility of being able to take a field site home with me, and being able to analyze stuff more slowly, not get caught up in all the excitement of field work. So it was kind of logical to go from close range photogrammetry, try to use those techniques and put stuff in the air to get a better, I guess, larger picture of your field site. January of 2022, my advisor came to me and asked me to go to Australia with her to go work a field site that has some of the oldest fossil material on Earth, and maybe use a drone to produce a 3D map of the area. So that project, it ended up being more of a kind of application use study. I wasn't really familiar with ground control points, really how to make sure that my end product was, following a projection correctly. It didn't have reconstruction errors. So that was more of just a theoretical use case. And then I didn't really start using any real ground control until this Dinosaur Ridge project.
Was your advisor, I'm sorry, was your advisor seasoned and well-versed in Australia at the time?
Yeah, so she had been out there, I guess, 3 times before me at that point, but specifically that field site.
Okay.
So she knew the area really well.
But and also the application of technologies, drones, and so for everyone, it was essentially a warm-up, a audition, so to speak.
Yeah.
Testing use case.
So with Nefra teaching me photogrammetry, part of that was I got to learn the workflow that the Department of Interior uses. So I was kind of already given this tool of reproducible method to basically provide really high accuracy models. That gave me a lot of room to play after doing photography for about 20 years. So I spent a lot of time not only doing just regular close range photogrammetry. I played around a little bit with my drone before we went out to Australia. And I did a lot of work with turntable photogrammetry, so in the round work, playing around with how to bring in imagery and have it align correctly within that workflow. So I feel like I had the theory down fairly well, which allowed us to be successful with our endeavor in Australia.
For Dinosaur Ridge, if my homework is correct, you use the DJI Mini 2, is that right?
Yeah, so I used both the Mini 2 and the Autel Evo 2 V3.
Okay.
I swapped up a lot because depending on what I was doing, it was more efficient to use one drone or the other. So the Mini, for example, doesn't have any kind of terrain following feature, which produces a problem specifically at Dinosaur Ridge if you're working the eastern side, which is where the scrapes are. All those rocks are inclined at about a 50-degree angle. So if you're trying to maintain the same relative distance from the ground, you have to either keep a really close eye on your altimeter or have some kind of terrain following function. With tree coverage on that surface, it was better to use a terrain following function and then also have proximity alerts or sensors on your drone. So for a lot of the flights, I defaulted to the Autel because it has those functions. They're not the easiest to use, but they were still pretty useful. And then while I was there and starting to do some preliminary processing, I found that the sensor on that drone was absolutely horrible. So the resolution of my models coming out were really bad. looking at the residuals from the individual images, they were horrible. So I went back over a few different areas and reflew them with the DJI Mini 2 to use basically a better sensor.
And that proved plenty sufficient?
Yeah.
Also, as I was combing through your paper, I think it said you used the Drone Link, the planning software. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so we attempted to. When I purchased the Autel, I was under the assumption, like many others, that the SDK had been rolled out for a long period of time and was being used by a number of flight planners. It wasn't until after I purchased that drone that specific model, the SDK, had been released with no documentation. So no one has any kind of integration for that drone. And then we had all of our flight plans mapped out in DroneLink, but we couldn't use it after I got the drone, which was kind of a shame. For Australia, I did try to use DroneLink. Unfortunately, I didn't download my flight plans before we ort out there. And there's absolutely no cell coverage where we were. We were about 3.5 hours outside of Port Hedland, Australia, up in kind of the northwest corner of Australia. And after you get about 10 minutes out of town, there's no cell service. So I got out there and then had to do everything manually, which I think was a good, I guess, lesson learned, is to always double check everything before you go out to the middle of nowhere. The only thing that was useful is that my flight plan or my flight lines were saved. So even though I was flying manually, I could still follow that original flight pattern. I just had to trigger my shutter and control the drone manually, which actually kind of worked out in my favor. When I was doing the programming, I was doing 60-40 overlap, basically trying to cover a 3.5 square mile area, trying to get enough imagery, but not so much that I'm going to run out of memory card space while I'm in the field. But I ended up getting around 70% overlap in both directions. So I ended up getting better imagery doing everything manually than I would have done automatically.
Mm-hmm. Tremendous. What was your processing software and why?
Agisoft Metashape, only because at that time that was what the Department of Interior was teaching and what NEFRA had shown me, and I knew the workflow fairly well. Since then, I played around with reality capture a little bit, trying to bring stuff into Twinmotion and Unreal Engine, basically trying to figure out some way to bring these models and produce kind of AR or VR products with them, and testing Unreal against Blender. But still, I still predominantly use Metashape just because of the workflow that I'm used to at this point.
Terrific. So zooming out a smidge, doesn't have to be explicitly technological, but for this Dinosaur Ridge discovery, what were the largest obstacles? They could be logistical, but something that was just a relentless enemy.
A few things. So I already had aerial data of the ridge that the USGS had given me for another one of my dissertation chapters at the ridge, which is how I originally found these scrapes. I wanted to go back and ground truth what I had seen by doing this on foot, doing close range photogrammetry, get really high resolution imagery to be able to basically show individual features extremely well, and also look at some circular structures that could be either concretions, lichen scars, or possibly eggs if these were used as nests. About 2 months after I had found these from the imagery, the state of Colorado hired a new state archaeologist who also oversees paleontological inventory. And one of the first things they did was put out a moratorium on traversal on dinosaur track-bearing surfaces across the state. So after that happened, I got contacted by Jefferson County, who I was permitted through to do this work, letting me know that I had to do everything through drones, which produced two different issues. Now, we can't look at some of these structures in as high resolution as we wanted to, because we're basically limited by our sampling distance. So I'm not going to be flying a drone at a meter over an inclined outcrop like I would be doing with a handheld camera. And also I was limited on when I could fly relative to not only how busy it was with tourists at the site. So this is a really busy site, but also with mating season for hawks. So I believe it's red-tailed hawks use a lot of the Dakota hogback where Dinosaur Ridge kind of sits as a nesting area. So they're protected by the county, so there's no drone use within certain months. So I believe I ended up leaving here the day that basically ended to be able to fly. But also, if they're in the air, you have to keep a close eye on them so you don't have a bird strike, which happened a couple times. Not the bird strike, but seeing a hawk getting circled, having them have kind of irritated vocalizations. So a few different obstacles just from the logistics end. And then on the technology end, again, it was how easy it was to use the EVO. Here in Hampton Roads, a lot of our airspace is not really friendly to drone use. We only have two small areas where we can fly without a Lance request. So getting the drone, doing enough training to get used to, basically it's flight planning software, which is all on board your kind of controller that deletes itself every time you turn your drone off. And then also getting out there and then flying it in topography, because here it's pretty flat. So not only learning that software, but also using it in a situation that's already difficult to fly a drone in was fairly difficult as well.
I'm curious, you mentioned it's a hotbed for tourists, and I'm pretty darn confident I came across something where there was a moratorium on walking on any surface that has dinosaur trackways. Is that right?
Yeah.
So there's just certain areas, but tourists will flock to the accessible parts.
Yeah. So Dinosaur Ridge itself has a walking interpretive trail, and they also give bus tours and guided tours. So you can freely walk almost all the way up to the outcrop.
Right.
All the way up to the outcrop in some spots. Unfortunately, there are some tourists who do climb up on outcrop. I mean, it's not a huge deal. They're not actively trying to damage outcrop. They're excited, which I think is, for the most part, okay. And then there are some exceptions to the moratorium now that some time has passed. So folks at the ridge are allowed to climb to do maintenance, stain tracks. There's just a lot more kind of oversight than there used to be, but at least they're now able to kind of get up and restain the tracks. Because after about a year, a lot of the original staining material had kind of washed away. So they were pretty faded by the time I had been out there to do this study, but also to perform weed control. So weeds growing on rocks, as they send their roots down, they can start opening up cracks. As those cracks expand, those rocks can fall away. So you can get increased, basically loss of resources if you're not controlling vegetation growth on these surfaces. So I think at this point, a lot of that's resumed, which is good to hear.
Wonderful. Dr. Buntin, what is bioglue?
So bioglue is basically substance that cyanobacteria and other microbes, basically small, simple algae, form to basically start binding sediments together. So if you're living in the substrate, it's easier if you have some mechanism to keep that substrate from moving and shifting than it is if you're just freely living in the sediment. So they release this substance called an extracellular polymeric substance, which basically helps bind sediments together, almost like a glue. what that also does is they can start to precipitate out cement materials as they're growing and living. So not only are you stabilizing sediments with that bioglue, you're also starting to harden and turn those sediments into rock, which is really important not only for the dinosaur tracks, Dinosaur Ridge, but also a lot of the other trace fossils there. Because usually you're not going to get really good preservation unless you have fossils being rapidly buried. A lot of these surfaces have really thick microbial mass that suggests that there was no sedimentation for months at a time and in some intervals. So having that kind of microbial mediation to stabilize those surfaces allowed for a lot of these trackways to be preserved and still be visible today.
When did you know you were onto something bigger than just some fossilized footprints? Or footprints, paw prints. Apologies. What would you get the drift, though? I mean...
Yeah. I think when the Mokelstad paper came out describing some scrapes around the original scrape that was described in 2016. So we know of these scrapes at 4 different sites where they occur, where there's more than just one. The other 3 sites, there's anywhere from 11 up to around 60 in a pretty small area. After Tom Mokelstad and Spencer Lucas described, I believe, 5 additional scrapes, I immediately thought there were more. And I say that because during my field site, and if you ever go out there yourself, if you look up, it's a pretty rough and bumpy and hummocky surface. And I'd spoken with not only Martin Lockley, but also some of the Dinosaur Ridge volunteers about these large depressions that kind of make that surface so irregular. And after the Mokelstad paper came out, I think I immediately knew what they were. And then it took me maybe 3 or 4 days to start confirming that assumption. So after the processing was done, and I was able to start looking at models, I found about a dozen of them within a 2-day period. So it was a pretty rapid turnaround from reading that paper to having validation, knowing that this was a pretty active, busy site.
How thrilling. And the broad experience comparing this to Australia when you were, maybe fair to say, more of a novice, what was more enjoyable of the two? Just pure enjoyment.
I think Australia, only because it was one of the weirdest landscapes I've ever worked.
Pure bush. Yeah.
Yeah. And my launch point was about 400 feet above where we were camping. So anytime I would go to fly the drone, I'd have to climb for about an hour and a half. But after I got up there, I had an awesome view of the Pilbara Desert. So just being up there, not only controlling the drone, but just taking in the land was awesome. And I think the weirdest kind of experience of all that was it looks a lot like Utah in some areas. So you go a couple days and you just completely forget where you are, and then a kangaroo would run by. You're like, oh yeah, on the opposite side of the planet. The only thing I didn't enjoy about that was keeping my batteries charged. I took a solar powered battery pack that would pretty much take the entire day to fully recharge. And between getting my batteries for the next day fully charged and doing some pre-processing to make sure that I had good quality imagery, I would completely drain that battery pack. So I was having to find a balance of being able to continue to fly the drone, and also make sure that my data was good for when we go back.
I mean, what a rich learning curve, though, that Australia clearly presented you. How long are we talking? Were you in the bush?
We're out there for 3.5 weeks.
Okay.
So a good bit of time.
Beautiful. So I have the last few questions on Dinosaur Ridge specifically.
Mm.
Is there anything else you were able to infer about the, let's call it, behavior or size even of these? Oh, this is the prime opportunity to introduce. These are theropods. Is that right?
Yeah, so these are theropod dinosaurs, which are kind of, if you think about theropods, usually these are the large weed eaters. So like Allosaurus, T-Rex that we're all familiar with. These are probably some kind of ornithomimid, which looks more like an ostrich. And we're probably around a meter and a half, so 3 to 4 feet at the hip. So not terribly huge. Still pretty small.
We covered the process of elimination. Is there anything going forward, just some respectful devil's advocacy, that could falsify the interpretation?
Yeah. This could be from animals trying to bed down. The only reason I don't think that's really feasible is we would expect to see impressions from the rest of the body. So like where there basically our elbows, if you think about an ostrich or a large bird sitting down, it's going to be resting those elbows on the ground. So you will see some traces of those in the fossil record, as well as basically their pelvic bone or ischium, which would be projecting into the sediment. So you would see a depression along the midline of a lot of these traces if they were sitting down, and then moving towards laying down. You might see some impressions of the tail as well. And that would be more so with these large bowl-shaped structures that tend to be anywhere from about 6 to 15 feet long. They could also be from them digging for water. That's been canceled out by both me, Martin, and Tom Mokelstead independently, because all 4 of these sites occur right next to river channels. So they would have had open access to water with no real need to expend additional energy to try to dig down for it. But I mean, this is the best interpretation we have at the time. My analysis of their distribution is, in my opinion, really similar to how males are dispersed on modern leks. But I would be happy to see some other interpretation that could explain these.
So with hindsight being 2020, were you given a magical opportunity? What would you do differently, if anything?
I don't think anything. I think that this entire process has been a really awesome learning experience. And I feel like a lot of it has all been either due to sheer luck or just an accident. Like everything's kind of worked out perfectly throughout my entire PhD program in terms of my research. I originally went in looking to do an analysis on invertebrate burrows and trackways, and then completely went the other way, and then ended up working mostly with vertebrate traces, which I had never had any experience for. And I'd also never done photogrammetry prior to, or been exposed to it prior to this whole project. And now it's probably one of my most useful skill sets I have moving forward. And not only in terms of being able to do field work, but also in terms of just using technology in general, and imagining how it could be used in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. And we're definitely going to get to the classroom. I want to stick with this field work meets technology angle from a slightly higher vantage point. And actually, it's a good time to establish your PhD is oceanography, correct?
Yeah, so it's technically oceanography. Our department is a oceanography and earth sciences program. So there is some geology research going on, but there's no geology or earth science PhD track. It's all oceanography. So
okay,
I spent maybe 2 days on a boat just to have the experience, and then most of my core courses were all oceanography that had really nothing to do with my own research. I mean, some of it was in coastal areas. So I do a lot of work and rocks that were deposited kind of in rivers that had some tidal influence to them. So there was some crossover, but for the most part, it was me and my advisor talking, or me having to do a lot of research on my own.
Okay. Well, I will jettison the water questions I had, but that is a-okay.
I mean, I can do my best.
We'll see. We'll see when to tackle them when the time is right. But this first question from, again, this higher vantage point, your case study and myriad others, we're aware that consumer grade reality capture can enable bona fide discoveries now. Do you think the natural sciences are becoming democratized?
Could you rephrase that? What do you mean by democratized?
Is science going to soon be able to be practiced by those who are not scientists?
Oh.
And what do you think about that notion?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think that what it will do is better enable interactions with the general public and kind of increase how well we can use citizen scientists to collect data. I think there's still a lot of work a regular amateur paleontologist needs to do to be prepared to do their own research in terms of, at least for me, I tend to use statistics with all of my papers. There's a lot of background research and concepts that aren't easy to pick up on your own when it comes to technology or basically the study of these tracks. There's a lot of kind of subtleties to it, as well as being able to produce high quality data for publications, which I've actually had my own issues with for one of my studies at Dinosaur Ridge, where we used Scaniverse for additional 3D data to basically complete that study. My original imagery wasn't shot for photogrammetry, and I tried to publish that original imagery. It was maybe resolutions of 4 or so millimeters per pixel. And I feel like a standard, either someone who's just picking up photogrammetry or is picking up scanning with their phone or iPad, is going to be producing quality or models that aren't of like sufficient quality for publication or study. So I think that there's still going to be that gap there.
Well articulated. Thank you. Are there any nooks or crannies within, tell me if I'm wrong, I mean, the natural sciences, that's just my attempt at encapsulation, but we'll say geology, oceanography, paleontology, that resist not even explicitly 3D technology, but technology in general? And is that resistance just right, in your opinion, from what you've seen?
I can only speak from personal experience. I really haven't talked about technology use with others and how they really feel. But I think the general consensus is that everyone's really kind of on board with emerging technologies, with the exception of maybe AI. And I say that from the standpoint of your model is only as good as it's trained for, which is why I still am hesitant to really integrate it into my own work. I still have a lot of trust issues with some of these models, not only just in terms of content that's delivered back to me, but also the tone in which it's delivered. So
just to be clear, Caldwell, we're talking LLMs, right? Large language models? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay. Just want to make sure I was not conflating a 3D model reference. Okay. LLMs. Yeah.
There's also some pushback with basically image training. I'm not quite sure what models they're called, but basically training images to be able to identify a lot of traces. I have my own resistance for that. I don't want to replace myself. I mean, I know that having a tool that's going to automatically identify traces is great for the general public in terms of identification. It's great for maybe natural resource companies to describe core. But again, you could be potentially putting people out of the job, including yourself, if you help develop those models. So I tried to do that for one of my chapters. I ended up not having a large enough sample size, so I stopped. But I was conflicted throughout that entire process on what I was doing. Segueing to photogrammetry and LiDAR, I think the only real pushback is ensuring its quality and integrity. So making sure that you're producing models that are accurate to what they are on the ground, which I've had some discussions with Tom Mogelstad on about, in terms of making sure the models that I'm producing for this study and others are reflective of what's actually on the ground, which to my observations they are, but we conflict on some of these scrapes on maybe this area is more flattened, so maybe my imagery is not more reliable, so we need to do more field work to either be able to verify that or get accurate measurements, but also making sure that, again, the data is hasn't been tampered with. So with Blender, Unreal Engine, for example, it's easy to sculpt and modify these models if you wanted to, which I typically do for 3D printing, adding vertical exaggeration, taking away roots from some of these areas. But you could have someone who's not as, transparent about that, and then take some 3D model, falsify some trace, then publish on it. So there is always the potential for misuse with these technologies.
How do you decide when a new tool is worth adopting versus being just a distraction?
For me, it's availability of the product. So if it's affordable, so if it's something that if I'm going to buy, I would like to own forever. I'm not going to buy something that's subscription based, but also making sure that I'm able to integrate it with other software without having to stay within that same kind of package from the same company. Alongside that, making sure that whatever I'm using to use that technology can allow it to be used to its full potential. So using something like reality capture, cam scanner, Scaniverse to produce 3D models. I have a Samsung S24. I'm not going to be using my phone to scan stuff for studies unless I have one of the new iPhones that has LiDAR on it that can be fairly reliable from what I've seen so far. So I always just default back to using a camera. But I think as either phone cameras develop or my preferred OS is going to have LiDARs attached to it, I'm not going to be using those kind of technologies. With AR and VR, while I'd like to use these for my own research, again, I'm freshly out of my graduate program. Graduate students are really well paid, so I'm not going to pay for 3D goggles at this point. But maybe in the future when there's easier integration besides having to use either a SDK or APK to bridge models and the technology together, I would start using those. With fieldwork, I think the new technologies using either phones or iPads to collect field data are great. I'm hesitant on using those and don't readily use those because you're reliant on battery life for those, and also your ability to not drop your device or sit on it. I did use an iPad for a couple years to collect attitude data, so looking at how rocks are inclined or not, to help out with mapping, as well as just basically GPS collection, until I sat on my phone and broke it in the middle of the field and had to go back to my field notebooks that are right there.
So 2 lessons learned the hard way. We've got battery in Australia and the iPhone sit.
Yeah. So I think, well, the potential's there. I mean, it makes it easier to integrate your data, but you have to weigh how feasible using those technologies is when applying them to actual field work.
what has been your most gratifying aha moment working with an emerging technology?
I think the original model we did of the scrape or I guess the original scrape that we found was the most gratifying. Again, I've been doing photography at this point for about 20 years, so I'm barely fluent with a camera. And during my master's, I was using image analysis for a lot of my research. So working with 2D, you have a lot of issues with parallax, so you have to figure out how to get around that. And then seeing photogrammetry for the first time, realizing that I didn't have to do any of that anymore, and that I could take home a digital 3D model of my field area and take reliable measurements for it was kind of the most gratifying moment I've had in my entire research career.
Beautiful. What's something most people would never guess about the day-to-day grind of geology or paleontology?
I think all the background research and reading, and then also data validation. So for this study, I think I ended up doing 7 or 8 rounds of validating my data. Mostly just due to the fact that this is a really highly visible field area, really accessible. Anyone can go straight up to the outcrop.
Yeah.
So making sure that everything was actually there and that I wasn't either tired when I made an ID or started numbering a trace. Then also making sure that these traces weren't basically wood impressions, which again cover the entire surface. So having to go back through the surface over and over and over and over again until your eyes pretty much bleed. And then also doing all the background research to be able to even begin any papers you plan to submit. So that whole validation and research process probably took 7 or 8 months before really I even had a first draft together. And then the paper pretty much wrote itself after that.
You know, we've touched on data quality a couple different ways. Have you ever had to defend the quality or integrity of digital data to more, we'll say, traditional scientists, peers?
I think only for a paper I did on horseshoe crab traces at Dinosaur Ridge. And I say that only because the original imagery we used for the paper really it wasn't high enough quality to have submitted. So that was my fault. But in terms of manipulation, no. And then everything was pretty well received at my dissertation defense. A number of the faculty that do any kind of image analysis are already familiar with photogrammetry. And so they know some of the errors that are inherent to it, but having some kind of optimization routine, like the Department of Interior has and teaches, really has kind of helped me in the end for that.
Mm-hmm. If you care to speculate, how do you see 3D technologies shaping geology, paleontology over the next decade?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be kind of insane what it could potentially do. I mean, not only can you now digitize field areas, you now can start producing 40 data sets. So if you have resources that can't either physically be removed from an area for protection, or are so protected that they can't be removed, if you have any kind of vandalism, even small scale, you can identify it. So you can have enhanced site protection. You can quantify rates of erosion using those same basically time transgressive data sets to maybe try to get funding for protection. So building some kind of a shelter over your resources. Having digital field sites already available help you with field planning immensely. So you're not having to look at topographic maps to figure out how you're going to get to some specific site anymore. You can now basically walk the area beforehand. For museum collections, again, now you have digitized samples, so you don't have to have as many researchers coming in and visiting to look at maybe one or two fossils. So having to write grant requests to be able to visit, to look at some fossils for maybe a week or so at most. And then for me, being able to visualize field areas, I think has been the most kind of important that I think moving forward is going to have the largest impact. Not only, again, just to be able to see your field area, but also to show students outcrop. Here in Eastern Virginia, it's really flat. Our closest outcrops are about 2.5 hours away. So it's really hard to orchestrate a field course or a field trip with hundreds something students. And it's a lot easier to go to 3D data like the USGS 3D elevation program, pull LiDAR from some random outcrop, and then being able to show them some of the structures at that outcrop has been really useful to reinforce material that's been brought in. I think too, just being able to communicate between researchers, it's going to be extremely useful. So not just sending them an image of something and trying to point out what it is. Now you can send a 3D model, highlight areas of interest, and then have them physically look at a digital model versus having to squint and envision something in 2D. So I think moving forward, it's going to be a very different field than it's traditionally been, where it's all boots on the ground, getting dusty. Now a lot of work could be done on a computer that could be done in the field. And I think we're going to continue seeing that trend.
Very, very richly said. It spawns a couple additional questions. Of course, without naming names, are you encountering a resistance, whether it's by the peers you personally know or just in the scientific community, toward this rapid foray into the implementation of these technologies? Or is it borderline, if not a full consensus, that this is how it's going to be and it's great?
It seems to be a consensus that is great. This whole LiDAR photogrammetric workflow is now kind of part of dinosaur tracking. Now, if you look at any kind of track paper, there's going to be some kind of a DEM showing a heat map of basically that depression or bulge of your tracks. Personally, anytime I've been in the field and someone hasn't seen any kind of derivative or hasn't seen the process being done, they've been extremely curious about it, and want to learn more about what I'm doing, how it's done. Because it's easier to have a digital sample than it is have to work, especially with museum specimens that can be extremely tiny. Being able to have a 3D model of some kind of fossil that's maybe 1/4 of an inch that I can now blow up and it can take up my entire computer screen is a lot more helpful than having to squint through a microscope and try to figure out some way to take images and do focus stacking and all that non-fun stuff. Now you can just do it once and you have that data forever. So I think everyone's been pretty excited that I've seen, and then our kind of trace fossil community as a whole has seemed to kind of take to it really well.
Does a use case come to mind as being grossly underutilized for what 3D technology could offer?
I think 3D scanning of museum specimens, and I say that, but also recognize that museum techs or researchers don't have time to do scanning on samples if they have a really large amount of samples to scan. This does take a significant amount of time of processing. I think it's being utilized. I think that there's just not the wealth of data yet that there's going to be. And so I'm portraying it as being underutilized. Um,
Hmm.
I think just on a community-wide scale, though, using phones to 3D scan materials, I don't think a lot of people realize that they can do that.
Oh, we can
Um,
attest to that. That is correct. Yes.
yeah. I mean, I feel like everyone just whips out their phone and will take a picture or something. But I mean, being able to scan something, it, not only can you more accurately show someone else what it is, but you can also then throw it into your computer and do fun stuff with it, like throw it into Twinmotion, start creating some scene, Unreal Engine, create video game assets. Um, I think that the more people get exposed to it, the more popular those technologies are going to be, and they'll start getting more and more utilized.
Almost a form of a network effect, but with tools, right?
Yeah.
I suspect your answer to this would be total job replacement, but I'm going to ask it regardless. How do you suspect artificial general intelligence, AGI, would affect your relevant fields?
I mean, I think for the 3D work, it's going to be great. I'm totally on board for it. If I could have something else do work for me, and I can make sure that the outputs from that are reliable, I'm all for it. Um, with trace fossils, which is what I study, I'm not as worried. I mean, I know for a lot of maybe simple traces that are usually seen in core, uh, I could potentially be in trouble if I was a geologist working for a natural resources company. But the traces that I've been working with so far, um, there's been a lot of subtleties to them that I think AGI will have a lot of work to do to catch up and be a real threat to what I'm doing. Um, so for the next maybe 10 years or so, I'm not too concerned, but we'll have to see whenever AGI starts getting rolled out and becomes a consumer grade products.
Mm-hmm. So, as established, Caldwell, you wear many hats, and currently you're also a lecturer at Old Dominion University, correct?
Yeah, so this is my first semester being a lecturing professor, and currently trying to integrate some of these technologies into the classroom for next semester and moving forward. So ODU just put out a 4-year plan where they're trying to switch not only how long each semester is, so I believe we're switching to 8-week semesters, which now we're condensing material. But we're also trying to switch to smart classrooms, utilizing technology to reinforce course materials. So a lot of this, either photogrammetry or LiDAR, has been kind of on my mind a lot recently in terms of not only how we could bring 3D models in the classroom, but how we could use extended reality to be able to teach students some of these concepts that we're throwing at them.
And so, as it stands, so this is a future-looking initiative starting
Yes.
next semester, and you said 2-month semesters will be the new paradigm.
Yeah, and I think this is going to roll out in the 2028-2029 school year, as I understand it. So we have a couple years to start preparing for it, getting our lesson plans modified to accommodate that, and then also our slide decks.
So, is it again? Please pardon the ignorance in this domain of yours, but is it fully green lit? I mean, is there red tape and hoops remain, or what does it look like getting this type of clearance to implement these?
For my classroom, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah. Just what steps it takes, steps required to have this embedded in curriculum. Do you have autonomy to just, it's your class and therefore you choose? Okay.
Yeah.
Wow,
So, I mean, for the most part, we have autonomy in the classroom. If we have a major curricular change, we have to submit some paperwork and get approval. But for the most part, I'm just trying to use these technologies to reinforce some of the material within either slideshows that we have that are pre-existing or from the textbook. For example, I just gave a lecture on deserts and desert landforms and pulled in a large mesa and butte system from East Utah, from the USGS 3DEP or 3D elevation program, to be able to fly through and fly around those landforms to be able to show them in 3D what this looks like, as well as doing a fly through to show smaller scale structures. Basically giving them a visual of what they're seeing on a single slide page or page in the book. So being able to have that kind of spatial awareness and how these structures are related, and being able to see these structures from multiple scales. What I would like to do is eventually move into using either AR or VR with either models that I've generated, those that are publicly available, or USGS imagery, or any other large-scale landform imagery, for these students to be able to, I guess, visit these materials in 3D in a more realistic setting. Because again, at least my classes are really large. It's not easy to get a field trip together, just from a student assembly side. And also you have the transportation logistics, which are a nightmare trying to move that many students. So, I mean, really getting them to see more rocks, and getting them to see them in the way that us as geologists want you to see a rock, is going to be extremely useful with at least XR moving forward. But that's really all I've can think of right now moving forward, except for maybe, kind of spreading word of mouth, the use of cell phones and iPads to be able to scan your own samples in lab. That way, if you're having an exam coming up, you don't have to come to the classroom to look at our physical minerals or rocks you're looking at. You can now just whip your phone out and see them in hand sample right in front of you.
And even in that example you mentioned as having done recently, would you say it's even a palpable sense of enhanced learning? I mean, for the students?
Yeah, I
think
the
Mesa example.
Yeah, because otherwise we're just throwing vocab at them and then like a picture with that vocab word. I think being able to understand what these features are, how they create other features, just spatially. So, like if you have a large fracture or a series of fractures and a chunk of rock that's missing, we can then pan down, slope, and show that rock that used to be in that spot. So physically kind of giving examples of what's going on, how a lot of their vocab words are interrelated and kind of feed into the system as a whole. And then how those small scale structures are arranged on a large landform. So I think having multi-scalar examples versus just a picture has been extremely useful so far.
Beautiful. So you work with undergrads. I'm curious what traits you would say are most necessary for those looking to merge science with technology.
I think really it's interest in the topic at hand, or just in general, whatever you're trying to teach. If a student is not interested in the material, they're not going to invest the time and energy and really understanding how you can bridge the two. So, really, those students are just going to ingest the material, but not digest it. And so for them, utilizing any kind of technologies in the classroom is going to be more of a chore than it is going to be of a benefit. I think if a student is interested, they're not only going to fully understand how how that technology is being used, but also probably take it home, play with it, and then become more familiar with it and integrate it into their other either courses for studying or even just everyday life. So again, either just interest, but also some kind of computer literacy to know how you could integrate technologies together to do more than is just being taught. So like if you're creating your own assets using Scaniverse, how you could take that OBJ, throw it into Unreal Engine or Blender and start manipulating it to either do digital art, make assets for a game that that student maybe has to make for a course, or throwing it into a GIS platform to start doing mapping, even if it's not super duper accurate in terms of whatever projection they're using. I mean, at least they can still discover that they can bring materials that they've generated into any kind of a map that they have to make for maybe a GIS class.
I'm unsure the extent to which you've been in the field since you've started as a lecturer, but we'll even just say looking forward, do you anticipate your lecturing experience informing your field work?
If anything, I think it's the opposite, where it's my field work being able to inform my lecture materials.
Great.
Both the classes I'm doing are 100 level classes, so there's not really a lot I haven't been exposed to at this point that is being delivered to the students. I think having experiential learning to help better either explain the topics at hand. So if, most of my field work is in the desert, I'm pretty fluent with desert landforms. What happens when it rains? You get out of that canyon because it's going to flood. Or whenever our paleontology lecture comes up, I can pretty much just coast. I don't have to do a lot of reading before class to prepare. I'm already kind of up to date with all the material. So if anything, it's the field work has made teaching easier and has made me more prepared to answer questions that I wouldn't have expected from students when I'm planning for classes. And that can also give them additional examples. Like, again, going back to that large LiDAR model to really kind of hone in. That model was actually from my field area when I was a master's student. So I knew exactly where it was, what it looked like. And it basically served as a good example to show a number of different features that we're covering for that day.
When did you know you wanted to teach?
I think when I started my Ph.D. or shortly after my master's research. When I went in with my master's, my intent was to get another degree to help me be more competitive in the job market. I quickly discovered that I loved active research and kind of designing my own either workflows or just conducting research in general. And what goes along with that is teaching. So while there are times I really enjoy what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, my true passion really is in doing research and then having to do teaching along with it. What kind of brought me to this lectureship was I'm married. I'm unfortunately not the breadwinner in our household. And so I'm very limited on what I can do research-wise here with only a couple of universities if I wanted to do a postdoc. But a good kind of way around that postdoc experience is this lectureship that opened up basically my final semester. So this was kind of a blessing, if anything.
Breadwinners. How many people can break down bioglue for 5 minutes? Okay, go easy on yourself. Goodness. We mentioned earlier how much reading is required, I think, in the day-to-day grind question I posed to you. The additional upkeep with technology itself, I mean, that's just also an added requirement for your 16 waking hours, right? So the upkeep is enormous, especially as you're looking to implement this in a formal setting as, your classroom.
Yeah. And that's been a major headache throughout the entirety of all of this, because not only do you have
I bet
thousands and thousands of images, you have all the derivatives, which, like, for the Australia data, I think the base package, like everything compiled together, is almost a terabyte. So I'm floating between computer workstation where it's basically my processing. I have a laptop that I actively use where I keep everything that I'm currently working on. And then additional laptop, that's basically my repository. Alongside that, I have about 7 terabytes worth of hard drives that I float between as well. At this point, I have a fairly good system, but it definitely took a while to figure out how to structure everything so I wasn't duplicating files, taking up more space, and then have kind of a more stable, basically, again, repository to not lose any of this data.
Yeah.
And then leveraging if something's useful or not. So if you make a model that's probably not the greatest, kind of being able to say, I'm just going to delete it and redo this versus letting it take up space and you're never going to open it again. With the coursework materials, so far I've been keeping them on a drive. We have like 5 free terabytes through Old Dominion. So being able to utilize that space has been extremely helpful to me so far. And will continue to be useful moving forward until I reach that limit, which if I'm going to be using or stitching together multiple basically LiDAR products together can get filled up pretty quickly for some of this.
So have emerging technologies had any effect, positive or negative, on peer review?
Only thing I've seen so far is the use of AI by reviewers. I find it extremely annoying when I submit a paper and we get edits back and it's just a sentence or a short paragraph that is definitely AI generated. It just tells me that whoever did the review didn't read the paper, and really didn't contribute to ensuring either its quality or improving it if it needed improvement. I think it's just a kind of a cop out to fluff your CD and say, "Hey, I did this review," but you're putting no effort or energy into it. Which I think over time, if that becomes a general trend, it could potentially start to degrade science, and we could start seeing either more papers that become controversial or papers getting redacted.
I'm curious too if there are instances of the classic at this time established telltale signs of AI speak, whether it's your EM dashes or the, my favorite, it's like the it isn't X, it's Y. Like that's another one. I don't know what your maybe tells are, but
what pains me is I'm a big M dash user. I really love using M dashes instead of commas.
Oh, you're OG, so you've been victimized. Yeah, I know a couple people like that. Yeah.
Yeah, my master's advisor really hounded M dashes on me. So when I saw that was an indicator of AI, I was like, oh no. Luckily, like the language.
Okay.
So I ran my own stuff through AI detectors to try to see if that gets flagged. Their Courtship paper being one of them, and I got 100% human generated. So at least I felt a little bit validated. I feel like my writing structure is at least far enough away. I don't really use AI detectors all that often. But I feel like it's just easy to tell, especially if it's a short response from a reviewer. Like,
yeah,
it's just the tone is weird versus what it would be if it was a true academic writing something.
Yeah. Especially those who just won't even summon the energy to just do a quick revision, just a personal touch of a few words, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
But the copy and paste is just classic entertainment. Is there a common misconception the youth have about fieldwork?
I think that we're all just in the desert digging for dinosaurs, which especially with paleontology, because when someone thinks of paleontologists, they think of like a dig site, like at the first 5 minutes of Jurassic Park, where it's like a group of people with campers, finding a fully complete dinosaur, well funded. I had a rude awakening when I started my master's, where I pretty much got dropped off in East Utah and hung out there by myself for 3 months. just running around looking at rocks.
Uh-huh.
That's the majority of what my experience has been so far, where you're in the field maybe either by yourself or with two or three other people, um, and you're walking around actively looking for stuff. You're not just sitting in one spot. Only time that the dig site thing is really true is if you're a bird paleontologist and you know exactly what you're looking for and where it's at. Um, Also that it's glamorous. I mean, field work is really rough. Again, I work mostly in deserts when I'm available, and as a student and now a professor, that's going to be in the summer. Um, Work in Utah in the summer is pretty brutal. There's days where it can get up to 115 midday, so you have to start planning your day around basically what the sun's doing. So waking up at 5:30, doing field work until maybe noon, sit in the shade for a while, taking a nap, and then after it cools down a little bit, going back out and finishing up your field work for the day. Um, Also, there's not really a great chance to bathe when you're in the desert. So definitely, if you're near a town, get a gym membership, use the showers there. But other than that, I mean, you're pretty dusty and dirty the rest of the time. Australia, I mean, we were out in the middle of nowhere, no showers for 3 weeks. We were pretty gross looking when we came out.
Mm-hmm. That's gold. I'm assuming this stuff makes it into week one of Dr. Buntin's lectures to dispel some of these myths of glamour.
Yeah.
Tremendous. Caldwell, I'd like to talk about influences and mentorship for a little bit, leading off with a circle back. So Dr. Martin Lockley, I believe you referred to him as or said you would refer to him as a site mentor. What did you take from him?
Honestly, not. I mean, I hate to say this, but not a lot. So
Oh, we can eschew the question too.
no,
Caldwell, if
no,
I can.
I think it's fair, and I actually think it's a good learning or a good lesson for other people. So Martin Lockley was one of kind of the greatest paleontologists that we've had over the last century. When I met him, I mean, he was a great guy, funny, I mean, warm and inviting, not a mean bone in his body. I was always really nervous to ask questions or reach out to him, just because of how much of an influence he had on my field. So really, I mean, I talked to him in person maybe 2 or 3 times, briefly, and then maybe had a couple of email exchanges with him about the original scrape we found. Unfortunately, he passed away about 2 weeks after I had found the scrapes in the newer paper, so the large Courtship site. And again, I was nervous to reach out to him about them, and I think that's going to be one of my kind of biggest regrets in my life is not fully utilizing him as a research and potential mentor that I could have done. But for the others, Nefra Matthews has been an excellent mentor. I mean, she really allowed me and gave me the chance to develop doing this 3D work, not only showing me what it was, how you process it, and then also the standardized kind of methods, and was able to get me into a Department of Interior course. So really, I credit her with everything I've done over the last few years, along with Brad Breithopt, who's kind of one of her collaborators and has been throughout the years. They've really kind of allowed me to utilize this technology to the extent that I have so far. And then again, having not only a really supportive and helpful Ph.D. mentor with Dr. Nofke, but also a really helpful mentor during my master's with Steve Hasiotis at the University of Kansas. I've been lucky to have a really good support network throughout the last 9 years or so. I know that a lot of PhD students don't always have the most helpful or supportive advisors, so I count myself extremely lucky in having them.
we've talked at length about photogrammetry and your learning of it. And of course, Australia, your learning curve for drone piloting specifically, was that, and the trial by air that occurred in Australia, but was that mostly you? Was it a team effort where everyone was kind of taking turns? I'm curious about just the learning curve and if mentorship and instruction applied specifically to drone operation.
No, so the drone operation originally was my attempt to take techniques from close range photogrammetry and apply them to the air. So if anything, it was me just playing around and experimenting with the piloting. I had no real issue picking up a DJI and start flying. I mean, the drone link as a flight planning software is fairly easy compared to having to learn a GIS platform. And then piloting overall is kind of just like playing a video game, which I've been doing for 30 something years at this point. So it was pretty easy to pick up. I think the most difficult part of that, again, was not having those flight plans in place, or I guess downloaded, so for me to follow them, and then having to keep track of my overlap as I was flying, which ended up with all of that overshoot versus what I originally intended for. The other thing that made it really difficult was the Mini 2 is really small, and I can only see it for about a half mile. So having to maintain visual line of sight was difficult just because it starts to disappear. And that terrain is not easy to work with. So having to walk to some launch sites was a pain. There's spinifex grass everywhere, which is almost like if grass was a cactus. It will puncture you pretty badly. So even to walk a mile can take you 2-3 times as long as usual. So being able, again, to see the drone and then maintain overlap was more challenging than just picking up a drone and making 3D product with it.
You mentioned you have decades of experience in photography. Self-taught?
No. So I dabbled around with film cameras a little bit. It wasn't until 2007 that I really picked up a camera and started using fully manual shooting. I had an awesome teacher in Costa Rica. I did an exchange program down there. Patrick Alto, who taught us photography through wildlife photography. And he taught us how to fully use a camera, how to work the f-stop, shutter speed, ISO, what all that means and does. Not only within the camera, but how that affects your images coming out. And after basically him teaching me in that experience, I either wanted to go into the sciences or be a photographer. So I still maintained actively using a camera for probably the next 10 years or so. And then when I started back up with my master's, I started collecting imagery for imagery analysis. So I got back into it and was really refreshed. Coming into my Ph.D. program, I intended to do the same thing. So when I learned that photogrammetry was a thing and that it's going to be fully manual shooting, the only real thing to learn was the orientation and geometry of the camera. So it was a pretty easy thing to pick up for me, at least.
Is there a book, film, or photo that still inspires you?
City of God, which is a movie about a journalist who grew up in the slums of Rio de Janeiro as a photographer. That's one movie I can watch and it just until I get tired of it after about 4 or 5 times, and I'm not. Um,
That's a great call. It's a deep cut. I feel like once a year that movie comes up, and whoever it's with, there's just a collective, oh yeah, masterpiece.
yeah, yeah, I think that one and Meet Me in St. Louis, which is a really weird flex, but the set design in there and just the way everything's captured, you could definitely tell whoever was doing the shooting knew how to keep everything in focus to be able to absorb the entire scene when it was needed, and then hone in and kind of adjust your aperture when needed to focus on individual characters. It's a really beautifully well designed and shot movie.
Is there anyone outside of paleontology or geology that inspires your methods?
I don't think anyone really in particular, but seeing different ways that people use cameras to collect 3D or to generate 3D products has really been the most helpful, especially with all the work that's been done with macro photogrammetry and focus stacking, basically taking images or photos of a subject, varying your basically focus, and then stitching those images together to get a like crystal clear image of that subject, even if it's super duper tiny, to produce 3D models. It's something that I still want to do. I'm haven't found the time dedicated to learning that process, but I would love to. And I have a lot of reading to do until I can basically get to that point where I have the time to sit down and do it, and then print out the materials I need to be able to kind of make a rig. But I feel like a lot of that's going to be easy now that there's this huge community of people that have done it, and are doing it and are basically providing publicly available 3D models to print to get a rig together to do everything well without having to spend $20,000 on a rig just to do some focus stacking.
Sure, sure. Oh, goodness. Caldwell, we're going to begin wrapping up here. We like to do so in a slightly personal, random, maybe even fun manner. The ending of your Dinosaur Ridge paper's abstract, if I'm correct, reads, "This study provides valuable insights into the early evolution of life and contributes to our understanding of potential life on other planets." How confident are you that there was or is life on other planets?
So that is a sentence that we use pretty much in every paper in some form, uh, to basically push like this whole there could be microbial life on other planets. So read our paper and use this as a reference. Um, I
Savvy.
yeah, I mean, so with that, we're referring more to the microbes and microbial fossils in some of these field areas. Um, I personally think that there's other stuff out there. I mean, all you really need for life is some amino acids and the initiation of a metabolic system. Which, I mean, if you introduce electricity and some time, it should theoretically be a fairly easy thing to start. Um, I think with our own solar system, there's some good possibilities, especially in some of the moons of Jupiter, maybe Saturn, Europa, being a pretty good example where you have liquid water, as well as volcanism. So we have hydrothermal vents, which could be delivering a lot of the essential materials to produce amino acids and provide nutrients for any kind of microbial life to kind of sustain itself. And that's just with our own solar system. I mean, who knows how many plants are out there that have water in all three phases that would basically be a precursor for life. I definitely think we're going to find something. I just don't know when that's going to be. I personally think that they're looking in the wrong spot in Mars, just on as a planet as a whole. But I could be proven wrong. But I'm always excited when I see some article about the some exciting find on Mars, hoping that it's going to be they found some fossil of microbes, but there hasn't yet been to date.
What leads you to believe they're looking in the wrong place?
So they're looking at least in Jezero Crater, a delta deposit. So typically, if they're looking for microbial mats, um, or basically any kind of biofilm from collecting on that sediment, those larger colonies which form mats tend to form in areas where you have less current energy, so more protected areas. Whenever you have deltaic sedimentation, you usually have either continuous runoff of material or basically fallout of materials onto the sediment, which is going to be hard for anything that's going to be trying to absorb sunlight. It's going to continuously be buried. It's going to have to continuously keep up and basically expend energy just to stay above the sediment to be able to absorb sunlight.
Okay.
Or that material is deposited in large packages of sediment, which is again going to bury whatever is trying to photosynthesize to a degree that it now can't migrate up in the sediment like it could if it was being kind of subjected to that rain out. So looking for a deposit like maybe some kind of protected lagoon within whatever lake system that delta was formed in would be a better spot to be looking than Jezero. It'd be interesting to see if there's anything towards the poles. I believe there's some ice caps on the north, either the North or South Pole. But there's been some ethical issues in terms of sending rovers up there, introducing basically contaminated samples.
Like invasive species kind of thinking.
Yeah. I mean, I know that a lot of there's clean labs where they're making these rovers. Contamination possibilities are low, but there's always the possibility of contaminating those ice caps. So it'll be interesting to see once we start exploring those areas, what comes out of them. Given that we have solid water, and typically when you have solid water, there's probably going to be some melted water below it, either due to pressure or differences in temperature between that ice and the actual rock surface. And again, hopefully at some point,
I just have to.
we could get physical samples from some of the moons out in towards our gas giants that have water on them.
I have to pose the question: is the interplanetary stuff required reading in your domains too? Again, pardon the novice question, or is this just a additional passion of yours?
Yeah, so we do require them, or we have a couple of basically chapters we cover on the solar system, only because Earth science kind of allows us to use Earth as an analog to start studying other planets from. Because it's the one we have, and we can assume that a number of the same processes that are occurring are probably occurring on other planets that we look at. I mean, there are some major differences between, us and Venus and Mercury and us and Neptune, but as a whole, a lot of the fundamental processes are going to be the same. I really am not that interested in anything else outside of our planet. I just have I now have some random knowledge about just a few random planets, and that's really about it.
Excellent. Is it an active goal of yours to have your work reach the public, or just fellow scientists?
Just fellow scientists, and I was actually really surprised when Science Magazine picked this up. I have no idea how that happened. Usually your university has kind of a network, and they'll reach out to people for you. So having this paper not only reach again Science magazine, but then have it blow up the way it did was completely unexpected. I mean, I figured maybe this would be a well-read paper, given that Dinosaur Ridge was a um, fairly well-known, famous site, but it's never my intention. And if anything, it's a little intimidating, um, which I've progressively found out through interviews that if you say something maybe a little wrong, that journalist can kind of fly with it, and it can feel sometimes like they're saying something that was not your original message. Which, I mean, for the most part, the coverage has been great, but I would prefer for everything kind of to stay underneath the radar. I don't know. It feels like the stress is a little lower when it's just your kind of peers and colleagues being exposed to your work versus the general public. Because then, too, you have the people who just will never agree with whatever you're doing research on. And so the comment sections and whatever articles these are can degrade fairly quickly, especially when you're talking about reproduction.
Do you think de-extinction companies like Colossal Biosciences will succeed? And do you think it's a just endeavor?
I think they'll succeed in making maybe a couple species like what's been extinct and they're trying to revive, but I don't think that engineers quite have the understanding that, you know, biologists and maybe paleontologists have as well. I mean, of course, there's going to be a number of brilliant biologists on those teams, but you need to have more than just the engineering and biology behind it. You have to have good reference points, fully understand the evolutionary history of whatever animal you're trying to resurrect, what they turned into, so that way you can adequately kind of manipulate key markers in their DNA to get the traits you want. That being said, they're also not bringing back those species. They're making now a genetically modified organism that's going to be similar in appearance, but in terms of physiology, maybe diet, metabolism, they're going to be completely different than those original organisms. So I think it's, if anything, a novelty. A lot of those animals they're trying to bring back that went extinct, like dire wolves, I know woolly mammoths, maybe mastodons are of interest. We don't have the same environments today that we used to have when they were running around. We're in a period of global warming. When we were in the Pleistocene and woolly mammoths were around, it was drastically colder than it is today, and colder to lower latitudes. So if we're going to bring them back today, they would only be successful in a small kind of narrow band on our planet towards northern Canada and Siberia, versus having a large area to roam, such as the entirety of Canada, entire northern area of Europe down to France or so. So the environments are different, but also their ranges are going to be restricted, which could lead to extinction, even if we don't kind of influence any kind of mortality amongst them. So they would have smaller areas to forage in. We don't know if they maybe had some kind of area where they were reproduced versus have their babies and raise them. So it's, while the intent is good, I don't think it's extremely practical. If anything, it could be slightly cruel to bring back animals that are not adapted to today's world, and expect them to survive and thrive like they used to.
RCN has a fairly substantial GIS following, so I got to ask this. Am I right in seeing you have some GIS history with NASA?
Yeah, so I was a GIS development intern with basically a branch that worked with drone safety. And that was completely out of left field for me. I was halfway through my PhD and I went straight from my master's into my PhD, doing the same thing for, at that point, 6 years, and I was really burnt out. on doing that same kind of research, and I wanted to experience something different while I was still able to do an internship. And NASA Langley is right across the water from us, so it seemed like a cool place to apply for. And it was actually a really good experience. So I am pretty well versed in S3 products just from my own research. And then this allowed me to take it even a step further. So I wasn't just creating a field map for my first figure for a paper. We were looking at the effects of radio frequency interference on drones. So if you have a noisier airspace, that can affect the communication between the drone and controller, basically breaking your drone if there's enough radio frequency interference, as well as providing pilots the potential for a live display of wind fields, chance of precipitation, and also being able to display RFI to a drone pilot using sensor networks of basically radio frequency sensors, and also weather sensors on base. That took me through the Esri Enterprise product line to try to pipeline Internet of Things. So doing MQTT messaging from different sensors, trying to bring that into a server for an output in ArcGIS, which worked, but not in the way we wanted it to. We wanted to do a live display, and with the way that S3 handles MQTT or Internet of Things kind of prevented us from making a fully realized product. I think they ended up using or creating their own servers to be able to handle that material. So I'm not quite sure what happened after I left. But being able to work in an environment where I was away from paleontologists or just really any kind of oceanographer or scientist for the first time ever was really interesting, because I never really worked with engineers before. And most of the other interns were either computer scientists or engineers, which I think was good exposure to change the way that I communicate, because I a lot of times will talk to colleagues assuming they know most of the time what I'm talking about because they've been exposed to the same materials. But with engineers, they're not going to have a lot of the same background that I want to have. So being able to not just dumb down what you're trying to say, but trying to explain it in a different way to make a lay person understand it was definitely refreshing, and a good experience to lead me into teaching.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, digestibility. I mean, it's enormous. Academia, technology, we know it, surely, in our niche. Last question, Dr. Buntin. What are you most excited about for the rest of this year?
So I'm really excited about the possibility of doing more field work. Next summer, I might be going back out to Colorado and Utah, maybe. So if all that starts to look like it's going to be possible, getting field planning done, getting all prepped. And then I'm also rolling out an entirely new textbook for my earth science class, which introduces a bunch of 3D models that I'm not going to have to generate and retain. They're all going to be available through the book. So getting new materials out, besides using it, or instead of using a textbook that's been used since before I started my Ph.D., so for almost 10 years or so. And doing all the lesson planning for that and learning, or I guess making my own slide deck for that has been a challenging experience with how busy I am, but it's been really fun and a good learning experience. So yeah, some exciting things from both the teaching and research side.
Joyous, sir. Incredible work, Dr. Caldwell Buntin at Dinosaur Ridge. Thank you for advancing science, reality capture, and for coming on the Recap podcast.
Yeah.
It's been a real honor.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
Alrighty. Take care, Dr. Buntin.
You too.
Recappers, thank you so very much for tuning in and keeping those likes and shares coming. They directly enable conversations like this one, so innovation can flourish. We'll catch you next week with some news and the dandy tech history tale that precedes it. Bye, everyone.